In a world where love is a math equation, certainty reigns supreme and hearts beat to its rhythm. For Mara, that certainty is solace, an implant that reads her emotions. But on this dreary morning, something has changed. A fresh forecast from Solace, predicting the end of her relationship with Eli. 94% chance, 11 months remaining. Mara's world crumbles as she grapples with this new reality. And Eli stands by her side, offering comfort. But for how long? As the oracle's words sink in, Mara must confront her deepest fears and make a choice. Will she heed Solace's warning or dare to defy its predictions? Like and subscribe for more stories like this one. Mara's fingers brushed the implant node behind her ear, a silent question she'd been posing all morning. It was as unresponsive as the city outside. Gray skies, rain-soaked streets, and the omnipresent scent of damp earth. Normally, this would have brought her solace, but not today. She sipped her coffee, gazing out at the greenhouse's lush interior, while Eli tended to a cluster of seedlings on the far side. His movements were as carefree as ever, an affront given the weight she felt in her chest. The terminal beside her beeped, signaling another update from the audit software. She stared at it without recognition. In the past 6 months, Mara and Eli's relationship had progressed to a point where they could almost forget about the Solace implant's existence. Almost. It was like sharing a secret. Mara knew what wasn't being said, that they both checked their forecasts obsessively, waiting for any sign of an impending end. But neither brought it up. Mara's terminal chimed again. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat as she saw an unsolicited notification from Solace. A fresh forecast? Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the headphones. Forecast received, the oracle said in its soft, gender-neutral voice. Please review your current relationship status. Mara's lips parted to ask the inevitable question, but caught herself. She'd been so careful not to probe the implant too directly, fearing it would notice and retaliate by issuing a notification that would shatter their tentative peace. Review, she said finally, forcing her tone to remain calm. The oracle began to speak, reciting details in its soothing voice, percentages, timelines, probabilities. Mara listened intently, heart racing with each new word. The forecast was worse than she'd feared. Eli's hand on hers broke the spell, his touch warm and reassuring as he leaned over her shoulder. "What is it?" he asked gently. Mara swallowed hard before responding. "Nothing yet," she said, though her voice betrayed her lie. She knew what was coming. The inevitable notification that would force them to confront their relationship's uncertain future once again. Ellie's fingers traced a gentle circle on her palm, an attempt at comfort. Mara closed her eyes and focused on his touch, trying to push away the dread that had been building inside her all morning. The screen in front of her flickered with activity as Solace updated its data. Then it froze, displaying a single sentence that made Mara's blood run cold. Relationship termination probability threshold reached. Please proceed to query for details. The oracle's voice returned, calm and detached. You have requested notification of an impending relationship conclusion. The estimated time frame is within 11 months, with a primary driver flagged as implantee-initiated withdrawal. Mara felt the world tilt off balance as Eli's hand fell away from hers. She stared at the screen, unable to tear her gaze away from those dreadful words. Ellie stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. "We'll face it together," he said finally, a quiet promise that Mara wasn't sure she deserved. But for now, all she could do was sit there, stunned by the oracle's unyielding verdict, and wonder just how much longer they would have before their relationship became another casualty of Solace's relentless predictability. Mara sat frozen, her eyes fixed on the screen as if willing it to change its mind. Ellie moved around the small room, tidying up his pots and plants in a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to mock her inner turmoil. She had known this moment was coming. It was why she kept checking the forecast obsessively. Still, hearing it spoken aloud, Seeing those precise numbers in black and white made something inside her snap. She jumped up from her seat, knocking over Eli's coffee mug in the process. It shattered on the floor, ceramic shards scattering everywhere like tiny landmines waiting to detonate her mood further. "It doesn't matter," she spat, her voice shaking with anger and despair. "The Oracle is right. We're done. I've seen it before, Eli. Always, every time, without fail." She gestured wildly at the shattered mug, as if blaming it for her predicament. Eli frowned, but didn't move to clean up the mess. Instead, he reached out and cupped Mara's face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "We don't have to listen," he said firmly, his voice a steady anchor against the storm inside her. "We can choose not to believe it." Mara's eyes welled up with tears she couldn't afford to shed. This was exactly what she feared. Eli refusing to see reality, stubbornly clinging to hope, even as she tried to prepare for the inevitable. "We're just delaying the inevitable," she said, her voice cracking. "You can't fight Solace's predictions forever." But as she spoke, doubts began to creep in. What if Eli was right? What if they could defy the odds, carve out their own path, instead of accepting whatever conclusion the Oracle had predetermined for them? The weight of those questions pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. Mara turned away from Eli, trying to gather her shattered thoughts. The apartment seemed to close in around her. Too small, too sterile, a prison of her own design, built upon certainty's cold, unyielding laws. "I need some time," she whispered, the words feeling like a betrayal even as she spoke them. Ellie let out a deep sigh and nodded reluctantly. "Okay." His voice was soft but resigned. Mara didn't have it in her to offer any comfort or reassurance. Instead, she grabbed her bag and keys and made for the door without another word, leaving behind a trail of shattered expectations and a broken relationship that refused to die. In the rain-soaked streets outside Eli's apartment, Mara felt like she was drowning in uncertainty, an emotion she had always prided herself on avoiding at all costs. The Oracle's prediction hung over her like a dark cloud, threatening to engulf everything she held dear. She quickened her pace, desperate to outrun the storm brewing inside her chest. Eventually, she found herself standing in front of Junie's bar, its neon sign casting a garish glow on the wet pavement. Junie had always been a source of comfort and honesty when Mara needed it most. Perhaps that was why she had chosen this particular destination for solace tonight. She pushed open the door and stepped inside, the noise and heat enveloping her like a protective cocoon. Junie looked up from behind the counter as Mara entered, her face a mixture of surprise and concern. "Mara?" The older woman's voice was soft, but there was an undercurrent of warning in it that Mara recognized all too well. Junie had always been fiercely protective of those she loved, and wouldn't hesitate to call Mara out on her bullshit when necessary. "Yeah," Mara said simply, dropping into a stool at the bar as if the weight of the world had finally become too much to bear. "I need advice." Junie raised an eyebrow but didn't ask any questions. Instead, she poured Mara a shot of whiskey without being asked and slid it across the counter with a knowing look in her eye. "So tell me, what's eating you, sis?" Mara stared at the amber liquid swimming before her eyes, its warmth seeping into her palms as she cradled the glass. She could taste Junie's brand of tough love already, a blend of hard truths, rough affection, and enough whiskey to dull the edges. "Ellie," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper, "I woke up this morning with a notification from Solace." She lifted her gaze to meet Junie's eyes, searching for understanding or condemnation, but found neither. Just that familiar, unwavering support Junie always extended to her little sister. "It's forecasting the end of our relationship." Junie snorted and rolled her eyes in disgust. "Of course it is," she muttered, as if the very idea was laughable. But Mara knew better. For years now, Solace had been whispering its doom into ears everywhere, a constant companion to modern romance. "It's at 94% right now, with an estimated time frame of 11 months. Mara recited the numbers mechanically, her mind already beginning to calcify them away as facts, not warnings. Junie leaned forward, elbows on the counter, her eyes boring into Mara's soul. "Listen," she said, voice low and urgent. People get together for reasons beyond percentages and timeframes. Happened before. Junie reached across the counter and grabbed Mara's wrist, giving it a hard squeeze. "You know what your problem is?" she demanded. Her eyes were blazing with anger now, but beneath that was a deep sadness, the kind Mara recognized all too well from their own childhood struggles. "It's not Solace, it's you. You're already grieving this relationship before it even ends." Mara tried to pull away, but Junie held fast. "Let me finish," she said fiercely. "You've been running away from love since Mom and Dad split, always finding ways to leave first, to avoid the pain of being left behind. And then Solace comes along and gives you a reason, a fucking justification for your fear." Tears pricked at Mara's eyes as Junie's words struck too close to home. "That's not fair," she protested weakly. "It's not meant to be. It's the truth." Junie released her grip, but her gaze lingered on Mara's face, searching for cracks in her armor of denial. "You need to decide if you're willing to take a chance on Eli, or if Solace is just another excuse to run." Mara lifted her shot glass and downed the whiskey in one swift motion. She knew Junie was right. About Solace, about herself, but admitting it out loud felt like surrender. "I don't know," she said finally, voice hoarse with emotion. "But I'm tired of losing before I even begin." Junie watched Mara pour herself another drink without comment, but the concern in her eyes spoke volumes. They both knew that no matter what Mara decided tonight, Solace would still be there tomorrow, a constant reminder of love's fragility and the cold comfort of certainty. The question was whether Mara would let it guide her actions or find a way to reclaim her heart before it was too late. Mara left Junie's bar after that exchange, the rain-soaked streets a blur as she walked back to her apartment. The whiskey had done little to assuage her churning thoughts. If anything, it had sharpened her awareness of Eli's absence beside her. When she finally reached home, she let herself in with fumbling fingers, the silence deafening without his warm laughter echoing off the walls. She knew what she had to do now. Schedule an appointment with Dr. Okafor at the Solace Clinic. "You need to decide if you're willing to take a chance on Eli." Junie's words still stung. Talk to Dr. Okafor. The clinician would reassure her that Solace was mercy in disguise, that letting go of uncertainty was the kindest thing she could do. Mara booked the appointment for early morning, then collapsed onto her sofa with a sigh. She stared at the fern Eli had planted for her, its fronds reaching towards light that never seemed to come from within. The sight filled her with an ache so sharp it bordered on pain, because he wasn't there to appreciate it too. And soon, according to Solace's gentle whisper in her ear, she wouldn't have him at all. The night passed fitfully, Mara waking every few hours from dreams of Eli and the looming specter of their relationship's expiration date. By morning, exhaustion had claimed its due. She woke feeling hollowed out, like a house stripped of furniture. Dressing with numb precision, she set out for the clinic, Eli's absence a heavy stone in her stomach. When Mara arrived at Solace HQ, the lobby was filled with people waiting to check their implants or schedule appointments. She spotted Dr. Okafor across the room, that soothing, silk-smooth voice, those kind eyes. The clinician beckoned her over and led Mara into an examination room, its surfaces gleaming sterile. "So, Mara," Dr. Okafor said as she settled behind a computer terminal, "what brings you here today?" Mara hesitated, unsure how to frame the reason for this visit. It wasn't just curiosity, it was desperation. She wanted reassurance that her choices were correct, that Solace was right, that Eli's love was doomed from the start and she was wise to exit before being left. "I think I need another audit," Mara said finally. "Maybe some advice on how to manage my expectations." Dr. Okafor smiled warmly. "Of course, darling. We're here to support you." She tapped at her terminal, summoning up Mara's files with a few keystrokes. Her eyes scanned the readout before looking back at Mara. "You know," she said, her tone thoughtful but gentle, "Solace is not just about predicting the future. It's about sparing people unnecessary suffering. By knowing when relationships are likely to end, we can give individuals the dignity of exiting with grace and control." Mara nodded, listening intently as Dr. Okafor outlined this philosophy in soothing tones. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from their conversation, an edge, a truth hidden beneath the surface. "What about those who defy the forecasts?" Mara asked suddenly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "The ones who find a way to make it work even when Solace says otherwise." Dr. Okafor's expression remained serene, but her hands tightened around her pen. "Yes, they are rare. Only about 6.3% of all forecasted relationships survive against the odds. But that doesn't mean they don't exist. The thing is, darling," Dr. Okafor continued, "those who defy Solace's predictions are often those who insist on holding on to hope, a dangerous game. Love should be predictable, and we have Solace to ensure it." Mara swallowed hard, trying to reconcile this with the image of her and Eli together. The man she loved didn't want certainty. He embraced chaos. But Dr. Okafor's words made sense too. Hadn't Mara built a life around avoiding the unknown? Hadn't she fled every relationship that showed signs of becoming messy, unpredictable? "Managed endings," Dr. Okafor said gently, as if sensing Mara's internal conflict. "Managed ending," Solace said, its voice calm and kind. The percentage flashed in her mind's eye, low and falling. Mara blinked, forcing herself back to the present moment. Dr. Okafor was watching her, those gentle eyes filled with expectation. Mara knew what she had to do: schedule the surgery that would erase Solace's influence from her life once and for all. "It's time," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Time to remove my implant." Dr. Okafor nodded, her smile never wavering. "Of course, dear. Let's get you scheduled right away." The surgery was booked for the following week. Mara spent the intervening days in a haze, her thoughts consumed by the inevitability of change. She made no move to break the news to Eli. It felt like admitting defeat before the final battle. On the morning of her appointment, Mara woke with a sense of purpose, as if she'd already shed the implant's influence. She dressed quickly and left for the clinic without even bothering to text Eli goodbye. Inside, Dr. Okafor greeted her warmly, leading Mara into an exam room where the nurse had prepared everything needed for the procedure. Mara lay back on the table, her mind a jumble of emotions as she stared at the ceiling tiles above. "Are you ready, Mara?" Dr. Okafor asked softly, taking her hand in hers. Mara swallowed hard and nodded, trying to quell the tiny voice inside that whispered, "What if?" Wakefulness and sleep. Mara felt a surge of panic as a final thought crossed her mind. What if Eli had checked his forecast after she left? What if it showed he'd still have stayed, even with the odds against him? And then there was nothing, just darkness and the soft hum of machines. When Mara came to, she was in recovery. Dr. Okafor sat beside her, looking relieved yet concerned at the same time. "You're doing well," she said. The surgery went smoothly. Mara sat up slowly, her head spinning from the anesthesia. She touched her ear and found only bare skin. Solace's influence was gone. "How do you feel?" Dr. Okafor asked gently. Mara took a deep breath, trying to process the emptiness behind her temple where the implant had once resided. It was like losing an old friend she'd never really appreciated until it was too late. "I don't know," Mara admitted honestly. "Strange. Free, maybe?" Dr. Okafor nodded encouragingly. "That's understandable. You've spent so long with Solace guiding you. It's natural to feel lost without it." Mara looked at her, a spark of anger igniting inside. "Guiding me?" She scoffed bitterly. "It controlled my every move, dictated how I felt about the people in my life." The doctor listened sympathetically as Mara vented for several minutes before finally running out of steam. "I guess what I'm saying is, thank you," Mara said quietly, meaning it more than she realized. "Thank you for helping me escape." Dr. Okafor smiled warmly. "It's not an escape, Mara. It's a choice, and I hope you'll find that choosing uncertainty can be liberating in its own way." Mara considered this as they wheeled her out of recovery and into the sterile embrace of the post-op ward. She felt exposed and vulnerable without Solace's constant reassurance. Yet strangely, later, when Mara was settled back home with a stash of pain meds and instructions to rest, She found herself staring at Eli's last message from before she'd removed her implant. "I would have stayed. Estimated you're leaving at 71%, but chose you anyway." She reread it over and over until the words blurred on the screen. How could he have loved her so fiercely when Solace had already decreed their end? Mara knew then that she owed Eli a call, to say thank you for being the one who didn't need the numbers to know what was real. And maybe, just maybe, she'd work up the courage to tell him about removing her implant and how it felt to be free from its influence. As she dialed his number and waited for him to answer, Mara couldn't help but wonder, now that Solace was gone, would Eli still choose her? Or had she already won by choosing herself? Months. "I thought I'd never hear from you again." She swallowed hard. "Hi," she said, her own voice shaking slightly. "I wanted to thank you for everything." She paused, searching for the right words. "For choosing me, even when Solace knew we wouldn't last." "You're welcome," Eli replied quietly. "But I have to ask, did you really need Solace to tell you that?" Mara laughed bitterly. "Need it? No, but it was safer that way." She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. The implant is gone." "Really?" he asked after a moment. "Why?" "I didn't want to know anymore. I wanted to choose for myself, not because some machine said it was the most likely outcome." She took a deep breath, the silence between them stretching out like a bridge. "What do you think? Do I sound crazy?" There was a moment's pause before Eli responded, his tone warm and understanding as ever. "You're one of the bravest people I know," he said simply. "And if that means trusting yourself more than any machine, then so be it." Mara smiled despite herself, a soft warmth spreading through her chest. "Thanks for being such an optimist," she murmured. "Hey, someone's got to balance you out." Ellie chuckled lightly. "So, when do you want me over? I've missed that fern of yours." "How about now?" They arranged for Eli to pick up some groceries on his way and be there within the hour. As Mara hung up the phone and looked around her apartment, still spotless, still too clean, but with that new, strange feeling of possibility hanging in the air, she realized just how much she'd been living by proxy through Solace all these years. Eli's arrival was a burst of color and chaos, like a sunrise after midnight. He strode into her apartment carrying 2 bags full of fresh produce, his eyes alight with excitement as he scanned the place. "I'm going to kill your fern," he said happily, already heading for the window well. "You're welcome here," she told herself quietly. This was home now, imperfect, unpredictable, and alive with the potential for new predictions, new choices, and new chances at love and life. The next few weeks blurred together in a happy haze of rediscovery. Mara found herself laughing again, touching Eli's hand without counting down to their inevitable demise, sleeping facing him because it felt right instead of cold calculation. Of course, Solace was still there, lurking in Mara's mind like a shadow on the periphery of her awareness. Every so often she'd catch herself glancing at the empty node behind her ear, half expecting to see that soothing blue glow once more. But each time it didn't come. She felt a flicker of pride and independence. It was enough to keep her going, even when doubt crept in late at night as they lay entwined under the covers. Mara would find herself wondering if Solace had still been running in the background, predicting their future with its infamous accuracy. Would Eli still want her? She never voiced those fears aloud, knowing that Eli's love was a choice he made every day based on who she was, not on any probability or percentage. And yet sometimes she couldn't help but reach for her phone, fingers hovering over the screen as if to check one last time. Would it matter what Solace said now, or would she finally trust herself enough to know that their ending, whatever and whenever it came, would be beautiful because they chose it together? Gauge his expression. "I don't understand why you're so obsessed with knowing exactly when and how things will end," Eli continued, his voice filled with a mix of concern and curiosity. Mara sighed inwardly. It was such an innocent question, yet it hit her in the chest like a sledgehammer. She had always been so focused on the future that she hadn't stopped to consider what Eli might be thinking or feeling. "I guess I just want to know what to expect," Mara replied, trying to sound reasonable. It's easier for me to deal with uncertainty if I can quantify it. Eli frowned slightly, his grip on her hand tightening. But don't you think that by focusing so much on the end, you're making it inevitable, like you're somehow willing it into being? Mara felt a pang of guilt and shame at Eli's words. Was he right? Was she unconsciously manifesting the very outcome she feared? War. But with Eli by her side, guiding her hand when necessary, she found her footing again. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Long walks in the rain-soaked park, cozy evenings huddled around the ferns in Mara's apartment, late-night conversations that blurred the lines between past and present. And through it all, Mara felt herself unraveling from the tight coil of certainty that had governed her life. The forecast still lurked at the edges of her consciousness, like a nagging whisper she couldn't quite ignore. But with each passing day, its hold weakened until it was just a persistent itch, an occasional longing for the familiarity of percentages and probabilities. Mara started to wonder if maybe Eli had been right all along. The true happiness lay in embracing the unknown. One evening, as they were preparing dinner together, Ellie attempting to cook something other than his signature fern soup, Mara felt the familiar tingle at the back of her neck, the precursor to an unsolicited notification from Solace. Her heart skipped a beat as she reached up to touch the implant node, now more a reassuring presence than a constant companion. But nothing happened. No gentle voice whispered in her ear, no percentage points flickered across her vision. Mara frowned, puzzled, and glanced at Eli, who was busy mincing garlic with undue enthusiasm. "Did you ever check your forecast again?" she asked casually as he added the minced cloves to the pan. Eli paused, a look of surprise crossing his features before he nodded. "Yeah," he admitted a few times, "but honestly, it's been so long since I last looked that I've kind of forgotten what it feels like." He turned back to stir the contents of the pot. "What about you?" His voice was laced with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. Mara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She had kept her own forecast hidden for so long, even from Eli, despite his willingness to defy Solace's predictions. But now, with its silence ringing in her ears, she found herself wanting to confide in him more than ever before. She paused, taking a deep breath as she weighed the risks and benefits of sharing. Then, in a rush of vulnerability, Mara told him everything about the 94% likelihood of their relationship ending, the estimated time frame, and her own desperate attempts to preempt that outcome. As the words spilled out of her, she felt a weight lifting off her chest, like she'd finally exhaled a breath she'd been holding for years. Eli listened intently, his face a mask of concern, but also, Mara thought she detected it, something akin to relief. When she finished, he placed a comforting hand on hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "I'm glad you told me," he said softly. "We've been navigating this whole thing together anyway. Maybe sharing our forecasts would help us be even more honest with each other." He paused, then added, tentatively, "And who knows? Maybe they're not as accurate as we think." Mara smiled wryly at that. The optimism was endearing, if misguided, but for once, she didn't feel compelled to correct him. Instead, she squeezed his hand in return and murmured, "Maybe you're right." Together, they returned their focus to cooking dinner, their movements synchronized as they chopped vegetables and stirred pots. As they sat down to eat, Mara couldn't help but steal glances at Eli, the way he savored each bite, the contented look on his face. She felt a pang of something akin to envy. He had never known the suffocating grip of certainty like she had. But maybe that was what made him so resilient in the face of uncertainty. Suddenly, Mara remembered Junie's words about how she'd always filed people under loss before they were actually gone, and with that realization came another, a growing unease that she might be doing the same to Eli now. She pushed away from the table and stood up abruptly, spilling her half-eaten plate of vegetables onto the floor. "Eli," she said urgently, "I need to talk to you about something." Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and determination as she reached for his hand again. "Something Junie said to me. She accused me of pre-grieving everyone in my life, even you, of deciding how and when things end before they actually do." Ellie's expression darkened, concern etched across his face. "What are you saying, Mara?" he asked gently, as if she were a fragile thing that might shatter at the slightest misstep. And in that moment, Mara realized what she had to admit, what Junie had been trying to tell her all along. She looked Eli straight in the eye and whispered, I think I've been doing that to you. Deciding when our relationship ends before we even get a chance to find out if it could work. The confession hung between them like a challenge or an accusation. Mara wasn't sure which. Ellie's eyes widened as he processed her words. Then, slowly, his face softened into a look of understanding, tinged with sadness and a hint of anger, directed inwardly at himself for not seeing this sooner. "Mara," he said softly, "you were right to be wary. We both have our scars and our fears, but I want you to know that I'm willing to take the risk on us, even if Solace says otherwise." The words reverberated through Mara like a gentle shock wave, leaving her feeling raw and exposed. She nodded slowly, aware of Mara's thoughts were a maelstrom as she stared at Eli, his earnestness a palpable force in the room. She felt like she was drowning in certainty, her own, his, and now the oracle's silent judgment, lurking behind her ear like a malignant muse. "So you're willing to gamble on the 3%, Mara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Whisper as she forced herself to consider this new variable. Eli nodded. "The percentage doesn't matter. It never did. You do." Mara's gaze fell to her hands, which were clenched into fists in her lap. The words reconciliation behavior echoed through her mind like a taunt, the oracle's voice as calm and reasonable as ever. She was winning. But what was she really winning? With a sudden movement, Mara stood up and crossed the room, putting distance between herself and Eli. "You don't understand," she said more forcefully this time. "The number doesn't just predict our relationship. It's a mirror to my own fears." Eli followed her, his steps slow and measured. "Then let me help you break free of those chains," he said softly. Mara laughed harshly, the sound bitter on her tongue. "It's not that simple. I've spent years refining this certainty, Eli. It's who I am now." She turned to face him, her eyes hard with the weight of her own conviction. "You're asking me to abandon everything I know about myself and trust something as ephemeral and unpredictable as love." Eli's expression was pained, but he didn't back down. "And what is this certainty you cling to so desperately? A guarantee that heartbreak will never touch you again?" Mara recoiled from the accusation, feeling a surge of anger and defensiveness. "It's not about avoiding pain. It's about knowing when it's inevitable," Eli asked gently. "But at what cost? You've been living in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the clock to run out on your relationships, rather than trying to fill them with life." Mara felt as if he had punched her in the gut. The words hit their mark all too well. She looked away, unable to meet his eyes, and that was when she saw it. Her hand, drifting up towards the implant node behind her ear. Without thinking, Mara reached up and touched the small, unassuming device, feeling its familiar warmth against her skin. The oracle's voice whispered in her mind, a soft, encouraging hum that seemed to say, "You're doing the right thing." Mara pulled back, her fingers trembling as she gazed at Eli with tear-blurred eyes. "I can't," she said, barely above a whisper. "I just can't take the risk." And in that moment, she made her decision. The choice between certainty and uncertainty, safety and chance. With a deep breath, Mara reached for her phone and dialed Dr. Okafor's number. It was time to schedule that appointment once more. Time to reclaim control over her own destiny, no matter the cost. "Schedule me for a consultation tomorrow morning, please," Mara said, her voice steady as she watched Eli's face fall. There was a moment of stunned silence before he spoke. "Why? What's changed?" His words were laced with disappointment and a hint of anger, the same emotions that had been building in him for months. Mara couldn't blame him for feeling that way, but she didn't have time to sugarcoat her decision. The oracle's words echoed in her mind. A forecast is a forecast, and she knew what she had to do. "The odds are too high now," she said, choosing her words carefully. "We're almost at 98%. Ellie sighed and ran a hand through his hair, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the space of a single breath. That's exactly why we can't give up on each other, he argued. Because you keep letting fear control your decisions instead of fighting for what matters most to us. Mara flinched at the accusation. It was harsh but fair, and she knew Eli had every right to feel that way. She'd been so focused on managing her own grief that she'd forgotten about his needs entirely. He deserved better than a partner who only considered her own desires. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I know I haven't been the best person in this relationship." Eli's expression softened slightly, but there was still a deep hurt lurking behind his eyes. "You've been different lately," he admitted quietly. "Ever since that first notification, you've been pulling away from me little by little. And now," he trailed off, leaving the unspoken question hanging in the air between them. Now what? Mara knew she couldn't string him along any longer. It was time to face the consequences of her choices. "I think it's best if we end things," she said softly, bracing herself for his reaction. "The odds are too high now, and I don't want you getting hurt." Eli stared at her, incredulous. "You're ending us because of a number." He sounded outraged, but beneath the anger was a deep sadness, the same sorrow that Mara had been trying to avoid for so long. "Yes," she said firmly, "it's safer this way." And with those words, she began the process of disentangling herself from Eli once again, choosing the path of certainty over the unpredictable road of hope and love. The next morning, Mara walked into Dr. Okafor's office at the Solace Clinic, her heart heavy with anticipation. She was ready to take control of her own destiny, no matter what it took to make that happen. "So, Miss Voss," Dr. Okafor said, smiling warmly as she gestured Mara toward a plush leather chair, "you've come to discuss removing your implant." Mara nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. This was the moment of truth, the chance to reclaim her life from the tyranny of uncertainty. "It's what I want," she said firmly, meeting Dr. Okafor's gaze directly for the first time in years. "I can't live like this anymore." Dr. Okafor nodded sympathetically, her expression filled with understanding and compassion. "Of course, Mara, I completely understand. Removing your implant will be a simple procedure, just an incision behind your ear, and then the node is severed from our network. You'll wake up without that constant pressure of knowing when things might end." Mara felt a shiver run down her spine at the thought of being cut off from the Oracle's gentle, relentless guidance. But it was a necessary step in order to take back control over her own life. "Schedule me for tomorrow," she said resolutely. "I'm ready to move forward without that constant reminder." As Mara left the clinic, she couldn't help feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She had made her choice, and now all she had to do was see it through to the end. Later that evening, Mara sat in front of her terminal, staring blankly at the screen as she watched Eli's goodbye message play out for what felt like the 100th time. He looked heartbroken, and a pang of guilt stabbed at her. But she pushed it aside. She knew this was the right decision, otherwise she'd be setting herself up for a lifetime of grief and regret. With a deep breath, Mara closed Eli's message and reached for her phone to call Junie once more. She needed someone to talk to, and if that meant admitting her weaknesses and vulnerabilities to her sister, then so be it. As the line connected and Junie's boisterous laughter filled her ear, Mara felt a sense of peace wash over her. She was doing what she had to do, choosing certainty over uncertainty, safety over chance, and for once in her life, that didn't feel like such a bad thing. The months that followed were a blur of routine and monotony for Mara. She continued her job at Solace, auditing forecast data with the same detached efficiency she'd always possessed, but now there was no underlying current of dread to drive her. The implant remained silent, its predictions obsolete. Eli had moved out of their apartment. He'd taken most of his belongings with him, leaving Mara with an echo of a life that once was. She'd deleted every trace of him from her terminal and phone, severing all ties. In doing so, she felt she'd severed the last strings of hope that might have tethered her to a future uncertain. Mara's days were filled with work and solitude. Junie remained a sporadic presence in her life. They would meet up for drinks occasionally, but their conversations never ventured too close to Mara's recent past. It was easier that way, less chance of reopening old wounds. As the seasons changed outside, Mara found herself growing accustomed to her new normal. She no longer woke with a start every morning, fearing some unseen hand had rewritten her reality overnight. Instead, she rose and dressed mechanically, her thoughts focused on the day's tasks ahead. One afternoon, while auditing a particularly dense block of data, Mara noticed something peculiar. A name kept popping up in the background, Eli Furin, persisted across multiple files. She began to feel a creeping sense of unease. Mara's fingers hovered over the terminal keyboard as she contemplated confronting Dr. Okafor about this anomaly. Could it be that her implant was somehow malfunctioning? Was Eli still out there somewhere, influencing her life in ways she couldn't perceive? The more Mara thought about it, the more certain she became that something had to be wrong. She made an appointment with the Solace Clinic for the following day, not knowing exactly what questions she would ask, only that she needed answers. As Mara lay in bed that night, staring up at her dark ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed certainty was about to unravel. The prospect sent a shiver down her spine, but also, strangely, a thrill of anticipation. Perhaps it was time to confront whatever unknown forces were still at play in her life. The next morning, Mara arrived at the Solace Clinic with a sense of trepidation mixed with determination. She'd scheduled a meeting with Dr. Okafor, hoping to get to the bottom of Eli's persistent presence in the data, but as she entered the waiting room, she was greeted by an unexpected sight. Eli sat across from her, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made Mara's heart skip a beat. He looked just as handsome and disheveled as ever, but there was something new about him now, a quiet resolve in his demeanor that she hadn't seen before. "Mara," he said softly when she approached, rising from his seat to embrace her. The warmth of his body pressed against hers felt both familiar and foreign all at once. Mara's hands hovered over his shoulders, unsure how to react. "I've been waiting for you." "What do you mean?" Mara asked, pulling back slightly. "Why are you here?" Eli's smile was enigmatic as he gestured towards the terminal behind him. "Because it seems I'm not so easy to delete from your life after all." He paused, his eyes scanning hers with an unspoken question. "I think we both know why Solace has been showing me up in the data. It's time for us to talk about what really happened between us." Mara felt her breath catch in her throat as she realized the truth of Eli's words and the magnitude of the decision that lay ahead of her. Was it truly possible to reconcile with the past, or would it only lead to more heartache? To face in the sterile clinic waiting room, the evasion no longer seemed possible. "Talk," Mara said finally, trying to inject a note of defiance into her voice. She felt like she was drowning, the weight of the past bearing down on her with each passing second. Eli's smile twisted slightly. "About what Solace knows, or about why you left in the first place?" He took a step closer and Mara flinched back involuntarily, her heart racing in her chest. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, but it came out weak even to her own ears. Eli's laugh was low and disbelieving. "Don't play dumb with me, Mara. You know exactly why I'm here." He paused for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the same small device Mara had used when she ended things, the one that sent their data and sent the notification to Solace. "You used this," Eli said flatly, holding it up in front of her. "You initiated the withdrawal." Mara's mouth fell open. She hadn't expected him to have proof, but maybe she should have known better than to underestimate his resourcefulness. Her eyes darted frantically around the room as if searching for an escape route, and then landed on the terminal behind Eli. In one swift motion, Mara reached out and grabbed her own device from the desk, holding it up like a talisman against the accusations pouring down on her. "I did what was necessary," she spat back at him. "Solace showed me the way." Eli's face darkened with anger. "Solace shows us nothing but probabilities. You chose to believe in them because it was easier than facing the possibility of hurt again." He took another step forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You think you're so smart, always predicting the end before it even begins. But what if I told you the one thing Solace can't predict is how much we might change each other? Mara laughed, but it came out hollow and brittle. She'd spent her whole life running from uncertainty, and now this man was standing in front of her, daring her to do just that, to take a chance on something real, when all she had was the promise of percentages. "I don't want to change," Mara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want certainty. I want to know what's coming." Ellie shook his head, his eyes softening in pity for a moment before hardening back into determination. "That's not living, Mara. That's just existing in a state of suspended animation while the rest of us are out here taking risks and falling apart." He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers warm against her skin. "You can have certainty or you can have me, but you can't have both." It would be to let go of everything she'd built around Solace. She looked up at him, her vision blurry with unshed emotion. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. And in that moment, she knew that the decision had been made for her, whether she liked it or not. Ellie's smile was back, but this time it was genuine and terrifyingly hopeful. "That's okay," he said gently. "I'll be here to help you figure it out." Mara felt like she was falling into a bottomless pit as Eli took her hand in his and led her out of the clinic, away from the cold comfort of Solace and towards an uncertain future that both terrified and exhilarated her. She knew what lay ahead, weeks, months, perhaps even years of navigating through unfamiliar territory with nothing but intuition to guide them. But as they walked, Mara realized something profound. For all her talk about certainty, she'd never truly been living until this moment, and if Eli was willing to stand by her side and help her take that leap into the unknown, then maybe, just maybe, uncertainty wouldn't be such a bad thing after all. Maybe it would be the key to unlocking a life worth living. With that thought echoing in her mind like a mantra, Mara squeezed Eli's hand tightly and smiled up at him, ready to face whatever lay ahead with open arms and a heart full of hope.